A.J. Hartley is a British-born American novelist. He holds a Ph.D. in English literature and was a Shakespeare professor before becoming a full-time writer. And his writing spans multi-genres. Thrillers, fantasy, historical fiction, young adult, you name it. He's published over 25 novels, including bestsellers like Steeplejack, Guardian, and Sekret Machines, co-authored with Tom Delonge. That series blends science fiction elements with nonfiction research into real-world scientific and historical mysteries, particularly those related to the UFOs and advanced technologies. His first book with DeLonge, Chasing Shadows, was released in 2016, and it explores the idea of hidden aerospace programs, reverse engineering of alien technology, and the potential government cover-up of extraterrestrial phenomenon. Very thankful for the time I got to spend with AJ, and the trickster helped me out by breaking my mic stand right before we got started. Hey, how's it going?
Good, man. How are you?
Good. The trickster just did this to me, man. I have this. I've been using this for like 3 years, and literally right before you got on here,
it just broke.
It broke right in half and fell and hit me in the lap. I got it. I started recording earlier too, so you can actually see it. I'll have to play it back. I have a little tiny one I'm going to grab real fast, but I'm like, really? After all these years, man, this piece of metal just decides to snap in my lap? That's how it goes.
Did I see the cover of Trinity flash up on the screen behind you there for a second?
Yeah. I was like, oh yeah, but I wanted to preface it like, I know there's probably things that you're not allowed to talk about and that are off limits. So just let me know, like, hey man, can't do that.
Yeah, I mean, as far as Trinity is concerned, we've been going back and forth a little bit about when we're supposed to start talking about that properly. So yeah, I mean, I heard some stuff today. Actually, Tom is in Australia now.
Oh, rad.
With Blink.
Cool.
So, and I think he's in Australia and then New Zealand and then South America. So I don't know if he's coming back to the States at some point before April.
Right.
So I don't know when he and I will sort of meet in person next. I mean, we do most of our stuff by phone and email and such. Yeah. So yeah, I think there are official planned,
releases
for Trinity that I'm not supposed to preempt.
Well, I completely understand. I'm such a nerd that I've gotten every single one of the preprints, autographed by you and Tom through.
All right, cool.
Yeah. So I have those sitting upstairs and I love those. And I love getting, the post prints and checking them out and seeing what changed, like the 300 pages I'm trying to figure out, and it's here and there, but I'm sure there wasn't that massive of a difference between the two, right? I mean, those preprints that are, the actual not final book cover and that you and Tom signed and numbered and sent out. And
yeah, I mean,
it wasn't massive changes.
They came pretty late in the process. I mean, I was actually looking at the first Sekret Machines book, which I guess has been out 8 years now.
Yeah, 8 years.
And I was thinking about, the amount of time. I don't know when exactly Tom and I started working together, but he must have reached out about 10 years ago, which is a long time.
Yeah.
But yeah, because the books, especially the Sekret Machines books, took a long time to write and get in shape, not least because they're big books.
Oh, right.
And then, usually the book has to go in about 6 months before release, and it's pretty much locked from that point. I mean, there was a tiny little thing that occurred to me about Trinity that I contacted them couple of weeks ago about adding a tiny thing.
Right.
And even though the book is not due out until June, I had to get like special permission from the publisher to tweak even a sentence.
Really? Wow.
Yeah.
So that pre-published review is pretty thorough then when it hits, right? I'm sure that's pretty.
Yeah. I mean, I've had books with other presses that they have had for 2 years before release.
Really? Is it that legal stuff, or is it just like, no?
No, it's just traditional publishing is a very slow moving business, slow in a lot of ways, both in terms of the sort of day-to-day operation, also the sort of the speed or lack thereof in which they adapt to new technologies.
Oh, really? So
So
like a lot of the application is it everything like that as far as
all kinds of stuff. I mean, it's only been, I'm trying to think. There are some publishers who, until maybe 10 years ago, were still sending out copy notes in pencil on
really
on printed paper. Yeah.
on manuscript, like just
Yeah.
in the margins? Wow.
Yeah.
Wow. That's amazing.
So, some of it is, everything gets locked down and then it has to go through all kinds of um, physical preparation in terms of the production of the books, because we're talking about traditional publishing. So
Right.
they are producing physical books,
Right.
as opposed to a lot of small presses or self-publishing where in real terms, the book doesn't exist until you buy it.
Right.
Because
Right.
all they're doing is uploading electronic files, and then you click on it on Amazon, and then the book gets generated.
Right. And then it's printed in 3 days and it's in your hands, which is
Exactly. Yeah.
yeah,
Yeah.
which is amazing. I mean, you've started how many years ago? I mean, you've written 25 books at least, right?
25 novels.
25 novels. Yeah.
Yeah, and some academic books and such as well. So yeah, I mean, I've been writing pretty much all my life. I've been publishing fiction
Hmm.
since 2005.
Wow.
Um, so, but I'd been writing a lot longer than that. And some of the books that came out since 2005 were books that I'd written before.
Wow. Right. Right.
Because I mean, I think I had 8 complete novels before anything was accepted for publication.
Wow.
And again,
Wow.
that's a sign of the times. Nobody would
Yeah.
do, they would self-publish it, or they would find a very small press or something to handle it. But in those days, you either got a major press, or you got nothing, or you were like printing it out of your garage, and
Yeah.
the vanity press stuff people used to
Right.
do. But those things never sold. So
Yeah, that's amazing. I mean, like you said, self-publishes now. I mean, they basically Amazon sets it up to where you can just upload the file and then there you are, right? It's the Kindle edition, it's everything else, and then it prints as it sells. I mean,
yeah, and and in many ways that's a great thing, and I have a lot of friends who do it. Of course, the AI stuff is now going to make this
interesting.
nightmarish, because a lot of the big companies don't seem to be wanting to police the use of AI in writing. So, I mean, I found out recently that I think a dozen of my books had been illegally pirated
Really?
and fed into one of these AI language generators, so that they become part of a massive database, so people could produce books in my style or whatever.
Wow.
And the machine learning was growing out of my work and the work of other people, for which, of course, we get nothing.
Hmm.
And
That's got it's got to be massively frustrating. I mean, obviously the writer's strike, everything that happened in Hollywood over the fall, and like I can totally see it. This for the first time ever, I've started to write a book. Believe it or not, I've been saying it for years and years, and I've always started 2, 3, 4, 5 pages, put it away, come back, did something else, put it away, and then finally something hit me on like January 2nd. I said, that's it. I'm just going to dedicate my time every day, and no matter what, if I put 5 words or 5,000, I'm just going to do it. And it's interesting to see how the process goes. And there's everything I've read, and you've actually written books about how to write and how to get published and things like that. And there's so many great advice out there. And for me, it just it's interesting to see how every writer is different. And I'm sure based on your breadth of work, I mean, you're all over the place. You have genres all over. You have age, you write for different ages. You write for different everything. And it's amazing. And I'm trying to write for just this one thing. It's basically my experiences with the Freemasons and ufology, and how that all kind of comes together, and what I've seen throughout these years. And I'm trying to cram that together. But AJ, you've got like this massive amount of experience, and like, how do you like narrow that down when you're writing for a specific novel, like without letting creep in, or do you just let it go and just say that's just the way it is? Because it's you, it's all you, right? So,
well, yes. I mean, I should start by saying I would not advise anybody to do this. It's a bad idea. And if you're trying to make a living as a writer,
Right.
the one basic rule is you stick to what people know you for, right?
Gotcha. Yeah.
Because what people mostly want is more of the same.
Right. Right.
And I have never done that. Partly because, well, a couple of reasons. I mean, as a person, I always read widely. I always read lots of genres.
Yeah.
So it never occurred to me that I would only write one thing,
Right. Right.
When I my first published novel was a thriller, sort of archaeological mystery thing.
Yeah.
And I remember talking to my agent, and she was like saying, "So you're a thriller writer?" And I'm like, "Wait, what? No."
Just pigeonholed you right there, right? Just like immediately put you in the box.
And she knew, particularly because we had tried a few books. I'd been with her a long time. And we tried a couple of different books before that one landed.
Okay.
And so she knew that I didn't just write thrillers. But what she was saying is, okay, so now this is what you're going to be. And I'm like, well, I have this, fantasy adventure thing that I've been sitting on.
Right.
So, as I have said many times, I'm an agent's nightmare because they want you to, anybody involved in the business wants you to do one thing, and for really good reasons.
Right.
And I think, this was particularly true when everybody was buying their books in physical bookstores, that if I had a book in the mystery section and I also had a fantasy book, that was in a completely different part of the store.
Right. Right.
And if people knew me for mystery, they wouldn't even know the other stuff existed.
They'd be looking for the title on right there in that section. Right. That's amazing.
Now, since people buy more books online now, you go to Amazon and you can see everything by author or something like that. So it's easier.
Right.
But, it's still, when you think about the really big selling authors, most of them do one thing.
Yeah, you're right. They don't really tread outside of their genre at all.
Until they are so spectacularly successful that they can step out of the lines somewhat. But even then, not that much. Right. And if I say to you, Stephen King or J.K. Rowling or Tom Clancy or whoever, you immediately know what those books are.
Right. Exactly. It still throws you for a loop when they go outside of that, though. I mean, and it's interesting because those are the ones that I find even more interesting because I feel like as a writer, you have to stretch yourself. I mean, if you've been doing that genre forever, you'd have to stretch yourself to kind of blend in or, write to that genre. And you might not even be that good at it, but everything I've read that you've done, it's awesome. So I don't know.
I go with what I want to do for the most part. And, there was I didn't write children's lit until I was a parent.
Right. Exactly.
And then, the process of being a father and watching my son and remembering what it was like to be a child and sort of discover the world through books and made me want to, write stuff that was aimed at him or for him.
Right. Right.
And then, I moved from middle grade to young adult and such as he got older. And I sort of stay in young adult just because I like doing it. But I still do adult and everything else as well. It's interesting because usually when I come up with the idea for a story, immediately I know what the genre is and what the age group is based on the core premise.
Wow. So you kind of just narrow that down into this is where it's going to stay. And there's not a lot of,
it would be a really tough thing to shift midway through, because genre and age group really affect voice. And
character development and progression and things like that.
So you'd have to, if you got halfway through and like, oh my God, this is not a romance, it's a thriller, then you have to go back to the beginning and start it.
Well, but you did an amazing job, I think, in the Sekret Machine series, as far as, I mean, that applies, I think, to a whole list of readers anyway. I mean, from people that are new into the whole genre of UFOs and, the paranormal to people that are into thrillers and I mean, honestly, it's a huge page turner. I mean, my mom is an avid reader. I got that from my mother. She's amazing. I always saw her with a book in her hand and she always encouraged me to read and, from an early age. And, she's really not into the whole UFO thing, but she, indulges me. Right. So I gave her the Sekret Machines books and she was like, you know, she's a massive reader. She'll get a book done in a couple of days, in a week, and she loved it. I mean, there's the story progression and the character progression, you know, how it all goes. And I think the thing that bothered her was like, well, she was like, well, how much of that is true? To me. And she's like, that was a great story. I'm turning pages, you know, I mean, it was great characters and everything. And I'm like, Mom, that's the great part. I mean, I know some of this through all the lore throughout the years and things like that, but the way you did it to kind of make it an approachable topic for people that really had no interest in it. I believe, I think for my mom's, you know, she, like I said, she indulges me, but that had to be really hard to do as well, right? To write it in a way, especially with the jumping of timelines and, you know, progressing the different parts of the world. It was kind of, it was hard for you. And I think the interludes that you did were awesome too, to kind of bring it back around. I mean, was that something that was really difficult to build upon that? I mean,
I think, okay, so a couple of things. So first, one of the reasons Tom went with me in the first place was because I was not a sci-fi writer.
Okay, gotcha. Yeah.
And because he didn't want the sort of Star Trek-y kind of feel to not, and I obviously I don't mean that in a critical way at all.
Yeah.
But he wanted specifically, he said that he was interested in working with me because I had written thrillers which in many ways were historical fiction or were grounded in anchored in a real place or places and built around real people, and that's what he wanted, you know,
right,
because of the way he was approaching the subject, and he didn't want it to feel like, you know, sci-fi.
Right.
The
so
other
far
thing
fantasy,
was that, the other thing was that when we first started talking, and I was like, okay, so let me understand what this project is, you know. And I'm like, so what period is it set in? And he said, all of them. And I was like, what? And I'm like, and where is it set? And he's like, everywhere. And I was
you're like, I'm not, these boxes you're checking for me aren't happening here, bud.
Yeah. So, you know, I think a lot of the initial conversations that we had were about the kind of architecture of the thing, you know, trying to figure out how to take this sort of massive sweeping story that was going to sort of be leaping from place to place and period to period, and find a way to anchor it and provide continuity and sort of a kind of personal, you know, character driven sense of how the story was going to evolve, so that it didn't feel like a lecture, you know?
Yeah.
Like somebody saying, and then this happened, and then this, right?
Right. Well, it was very personable. I think the character development was amazing because you cared about the characters and you wanted to see the progression and how they went and then in the workings between them, you know?
And I know that didn't work for everybody. I've seen people say, oh, I couldn't follow all these different stories. And I'm like, okay, well, you know, I can't help you. That's what it is.
Well, to me, the way it writes, it's almost like a screenplay in my mind. I'm looking at it. It almost feels like you could actually use that as a cut scene to, you know, if it was a movie score, right? It was just here and then this would, you know, it felt like that to me. I mean, in my mind anyway, that you're going from this thing and you brought it all back together. I mean, it all comes back together to make a coherent story, obviously throughout the books. And I think it was hard. I mean, it's hard just following the UFO lore for me was like, you know, you just, not my autograph copy that I have from you, but, you know, like I said, the other graph highlighted all over the place and notes and Post-it notes stuck to it. Cause, you know, for the things for me, it was fun to go back and go, okay, I know about this, but then how do I put that in context of some of the true things that I know about or some of the UFO lore, you know, and how do I put that in and look at it and it gave me a completely different perspective, that human perspective that I think is missing from that. Oh, okay. In 1946, this happened and whatever, right? That's just, like you said, it's just basically a newsreel or something, right? How do you get that human element into it? And I think you did an amazing job doing it. And
well, thanks. I appreciate it. Obviously, you know, it's partial. As you say, it's not an attempt to cover everything connected to this particular issue or phenomenon. And some of the time, at least, the decisions about what we're going to explore and what we weren't going to explore did come down to questions of how can we make the story work on a character level, you know?
Right.
because the sort of the human side of things ultimately is what centers any story, any novel,
Right.
and it's part of what makes it different from a documentary or something which specifically intends to teach you stuff. So
Yeah.
this is more of a hybrid kind of project.
Well, yeah, I mean, and I mean, aside from historical fiction, which is what you kind of already had, in your belt before that happened, I think the topic, I mean, would change, but I mean, it had to be really hard to blend the fiction with the nonfiction in a way that was believable for the character arc, right? I think that
And
because some of the it's hard.
yeah, I mean, I do write fantasy, and I have done some sci-fi, since.
Hmm.
The key with a lot of that stuff, I think, is to make sure that as much as is obviously real,
Hmm.
as possible, is anchored as specifically as possible, so that when you start pushing into areas that are either made up or a little outside most people's realm of what is real, they will go with you because you've already created a solid grounding, right? And I think it's one of the problems with some sci-fi and fantasy that the gap between our reality and that reality being represented either on the page or on the screen is so massive
Yeah.
that we don't really engage with the characters. And I think it's one of the reasons that a lot of movies, sci-fi movies, are a tough sell
Hmm.
in Hollywood because they assume it's nerd fodder, and that nobody
Right.
really, ordinary people don't care about this stuff because frequently they're made badly,
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
and all we get is special effects and, you know, um, yeah, I don't know what we're supposed to care about.
Well, yeah, I think that, and then you look at the stories that do blend the sci-fi with, the human elements. That those are massively popular. Look at the Star Wars and and things of that genre.
Yeah.
You think of that how that the human or the character connection to that place is way
Well,
more
even more
solid.
with something like Close Encounters, right?
Right, right,
The things that are absolutely embedded in a reality that we see and recognize.
right.
I was a Star Wars fan as a kid,
Mhm.
and um, but I've lost patience with a lot of that stuff. It just seems, I mean, it's space opera,
Mhm.
and that's fine and it's fun, but it's like with the superhero movies. There's a point at which I just don't care. That there's so much
It's
these
just
endless
rehashing
battles
and
and things, and I'm just like, I don't. What am I pulling for here? I don't know. This bears no resemblance to any reality that I live in, and there's a point at which, and again, this is not a criticism. I know people love this stuff.
oh
I have
yeah,
a
yeah,
lot of friends who are hardcore Star Wars fans. Fine, great,
yeah.
great, but I can take it or leave it.
Yeah. But I'm right there with you. I think is that once it became way more commercialized and they just started spinning things off just to make money, it just got to the point where it's
Mm.
like I can't follow any of this stuff or the rehashing. The interesting part of that, the arc of the superhero that you mentioned was, when you have the other movies, what was the Will Smith movie where he played like the superhero that was drunk all the time and
Oh yeah, yeah, yeah.
Hancock, I think was the name of it.
Hancock, yeah,
Yeah, so
yeah,
that took that genre and kind of flipped it on its head, where it was just like,
yeah,
yeah, yeah, it was kind of interesting to see that disparity between the two because it's not what you expect out there saving the day. It's just this guy
yeah.
who doesn't care, and it was interesting to see how that worked. But that's it's a whole genre unto itself, like you said. That's the superhero genre. That's walls and walls and walls of comic books and things like that. And
Mm.
I don't know. I think it's got to be a big switch, but graphic novels are part of that. I mean, have you ever gotten into any of the graphic novels or ever approached any of that at any
You mean
point?
as a
As a
writer?
writer, right? Yeah. Have you thought about
I
that at all?
haven't. I mean, there are a couple of things that I have that I think could make decent graphic novels, and I've sometimes thought about it because the film and TV industry really likes graphic novels because they show them what it's supposed to look like. And since nobody in Hollywood reads a damn thing,
They want
I
pictures, right? Yeah.
shouldn't say that,
No, but
but
it's true.
it does feel like that sometimes. And
Yeah.
especially with fantasy and sci-fi, they want the visuals,
Mhm, mhm, mhm.
and I'm a very visual person as well. So, I get that, and I enjoy them. But when it comes to reading, I've always been a book person,
Yeah.
and rather than a graphic novel person or a comic book person. And I, there's a weird paradox with comic books, that because they're very expensive to produce, and for the most part, they don't sell in large numbers. So a lot of publishers consider them very risky.
Okay.
But when they do well, they do spectacularly well, and frequently they do generate movies and TV. So, but for most publishers, I think they still consider them a risk, and you need the right visual look. And, usually that means you come with a partnership. And I know some comic book illustrators and things, but, the prospect of coming up with a way of producing a comic book and figuring out how people get paid, the amount of work they have to do before you see. I mean, I'm used to it with writing. I'm used to the idea that I write for 6 months or something and get nothing.
Yeah.
Then hopefully we sell the book or whatever, But with I don't know, with comic books, paying illustrators what they are worth, again, as opposed to AI.
Right.
I think, I'm all in favor of making sure that people get paid properly, but I don't have the money to do it.
Right. But I mean, if somebody approached you on some of your other work and said, hey, make this a graphic novel. Cathedrals of Glass, for example, that series is rad. That could be a potential graphic novel when you look at it in that aspect.
Yeah. And again, particularly as a step towards some other kind of adaptation, there are some things in the works.
I
have to be careful what I say.
Okay.
But all these things are very preliminary, and they can, they say that in publishing, everybody says no until somebody says yes.
Mm-hmm.
And in film and TV, everybody says yes until somebody says no.
Huh.
And so that, you send a book in and you get rejection after rejection after rejection, and then you get one acceptance, and that's it. Job done.
Huh.
And in film and TV, you send something in and everybody bends over backwards telling you that it's the greatest thing they've ever read. And this goes on for months and months and months. And then the person who writes the check says no.
Wow.
And that's the project dead.
Wow.
So I'm wary of saying much about any of the things that are supposedly in development, because they can be axed at any point. And sometimes they get axed after they've been made.
Wow. So there's it's completely made. It's sitting there and it's just we're going to put that
and
on
they're
the shelf.
we don't think it's a good idea to release this for whatever reason. So
wow. That's amazing. And then you just got to look at this body of work and go, okay, because it's probably under contract. You can't do anything with it. You can't take it anywhere else.
That's also true. Yeah. That it can get tied up in, I have a series called Steeplejack, which has been sort of optioned repeatedly by the same company now for a number of years. And, and every year we'll go through some new sort of development stuff. And will it go anywhere? I don't know. I hope so. I would love to see it, but I have no control at all.
Wow.
Hollywood works with its own people.
Right.
And according to its own sort of logic. And all I can do is sort of, provide input or feedback if they want me to, or get out of the way if they don't.
Wow. That's got to be hard as an artist to see your work just be kind of taken over in a way, and kind of just be on the sidelines watching it as it changes or it doesn't or it unfolds.
Yes, except of course the books still exist.
Right. Yeah. Of course.
If a movie comes out of one of my books and I think they mess it up or they do a bad job or whatever, the book still exists.
Right.
That's why people think of books becoming movies as the supreme mark of success, right? Because that's where they become massive and mainstream, and it's where you make the most money,
right?
Because they pay you to go away. They pay you to take your work. They now own the copyright, and they can do with it whatever they want.
Right, right. So thank you. Here's your check. To have a good vacation. See you later.
Exactly.
Right?
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. And without any input, probably, or anything. I mean, from
Right.
that end,
Exactly.
just thank you. Have a
Yeah.
good day. Well, I mean, and at some point, I mean, people that it can't do other genres. I mean, like you said, you're pigeonholed, but AJ, you can do anything, man. You're all over the shop. They can take whatever your books, and you can keep going. Write a teen or young adult or whatever, and keep going through multiple genres. And I think you've not put yourself in a peg that where you're going to be messed around with, which is rad. But I think that's
I mean, I guess, I mean, as I said, the downside is that I'm not associated with one thing,
right, right.
so that probably hurts me in some form. But, what I was going to say before is that unlike a lot of writers, I had the luxury of having another job,
Oh yeah, right,
so I wasn't dependent on the sales of my books to pay my mortgage or put food on the table for my family,
right,
because
right,
I was a professor. So, that was sort of freeing. It meant that I could write what I felt like writing at any given time. Whereas, sometimes people get trapped
yeah, yeah,
into producing more and more and more of a particular kind of book, whether they care about it or not. I mean, it's like going back to Arthur Conan Doyle trying to kill Sherlock Holmes because he hated him so much, and being forced by his reading public to keep producing stories that he didn't want to write.
right, right. And it's just like it's almost like the thing too. When you get a famous band, you get that one radio hit you never want to play, right? So you play it everybody wants to hear it, so you do it as the encore because you just don't want to.
Yeah.
You do it again.
Yeah.
It's the same kind of methodology, I think.
Mhm.
And so
Mhm.
you become shackled to that one thing of your work. But yeah, I
Yeah.
mean, I think you should do it because you enjoy it anyway. And I think that kind of comes through no matter what in any art form, really. I mean, writing music, anything. I mean, like you said, I'm writing mine. I don't know how many years it's going to take me to pop it out, but I don't care. Like you said, I'm not worried about putting food on the table. I just kind of want to get the ideas out and, maybe have somebody go, oh, that's kind of cool. Or what the hell did I just read?
Right.
Either way, it'll be out there,
Well,
and,
and
whatever.
that has always been one of the good things about working with Tom is that he recognized as an artist himself that the books were only going to work if I was writing something that I was passionate about and personally engaged in. And so he's always been quick to sort of say, here's some sort of broad parameters, take it wherever you want to go.
That's awesome.
Do what you like, kind of thing. And obviously we talk a lot as we go, but it's
Right.
important to him that I feel really sort of invested in the story, and for me that means characters and what have you. Yeah.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, and it shows. And I love how where some of the things that, it's so descriptive. Like we were talking about, anchored in reality. I think I remember either reading or hearing an interview early on when the first book came out, where I think you and correct me if I'm wrong. I could be making this all up. That it was for one of the fighter plane. I think it was a A-10 or maybe a Warhawk, but you actually talked to an actual pilot about how that would work and what it's like being up there and circling around and getting into position and things like that. Am
Yeah,
I
it was a
right?
tornado.
Tornado. Okay, yeah. So
Yeah.
that was right. You actually talked to somebody who flew one, right? Who knew
Yep.
everything about
Yeah.
that plane, right?
I mean, one of the fun I mean, yes, when usually I can find people somewhere who know what I don't, what I need to know.
Yeah.
And it's funny when you're talking about, because I'm not a pilot,
Right.
but when you can find out a lot about the specs of an aircraft and things like that,
Mhm.
but the experience of what it feels like to fly a particular aircraft, that's a lot harder to get from just
Right.
reading, um,
A spec sheet, right? Yeah.
right, or Wikipedia pages or whatever, or the equivalent thereof,
Yeah.
But being able to sit down with an actual pilot and say, okay, so you've flown a lot of different aircraft. What makes this particular aircraft unique and why?
Yeah.
Um, I remember the pilot that I was talking to about the tornado, and I can't remember if this phrase actually made it into the book, but at one point I remember him saying the tornado was an easy aircraft to get behind in. where meaning that it was moving so quickly and it was so temperamental and volatile that unless you were constant, you were absolutely focused, you could very easily lose control of it. And I thought that was a really interesting way of talking about it.
Oh yeah, definitely. That is really awesome to get that perspective, to get that tight of a based in reality, somebody who actually lived it. That's awesome. And that shows. I mean, you could tell the whole entire part of that book with the way you wrote it. It was just great. Was it hard?
The acknowledgments pages of those books should be really, really long, but a lot of the people, especially in the military or in intelligence services, specifically ask not to be identified by name.
Yeah, that was one of my questions actually too. Was that hard? I mean, I'm sure it opened you up to a different world, right? Where all this information was, grounded and based to help base the storyline and everything. Was it hard to take all of that at face value, or in a way to find the arc of the character and bleed it in? Or was it just like this dump where you get all this information and then you have to kind of sort it out and go, okay, this is going to work, this is not going to work, and then
I mean, there were certainly, occasionally Tom and I would swap information, and I would sort of find myself thinking, either I don't believe this,
right,
or I don't know how to sort of work it coherently into the story.
right.
And in those situations, it was like we both had the right to blackball any idea that we weren't both entirely behind.
Well, that's cool. That's cool.
Yeah,
that's great. Yeah. Because if it didn't work, I mean, at least you had the premise, and I'm sure there's things that you're like, this absolutely has to work for the story, and he was like, this absolutely be in the book for the story to get through. So it's interesting to see. But so did you have a large list, or did you have, basically, like you said, if you had the Wikipedia, but you had to talk to somebody, or did Tom kind of just offer up people, or did you say, hey, I need to talk to somebody about this, or, was it hard for like all of those things? Yeah.
It was a bit of both. I mean, he had contacts, and remember, as I said, this was nearly 10 years ago now. So
right.
A lot of stuff that we have talked about subsequently in sort of, not me and him, but I mean, a lot of what people are talking about as fairly common public discourse was not common public discourse 10 years ago.
Not at all. It wasn't until 2017, 16, right?
So, he was filtering stuff from sources that he was talking to and passing things on to me. And then, and I think as a novelist, you're always doing research.
Right.
And as a university professor, I usually can find, if we're talking about material, concrete things where there's an area of specialist knowledge, I can usually find somebody somewhere at a university and approach them and say, I need to know about this.
Right.
Most scholars, I think, are usually delighted to talk about things that the general public generally don't care about. So, and in the case of, for example, that pilot, that was somebody I didn't know, but I was connected to through a friend of mine who was a Marine pilot.
That's cool.
And she was able to hook me up with people who she knew who flew those aircraft, and so
that's awesome. Yeah, to just get down to the core of like what these people know and how to convey that. But yeah, I mean, some of that stuff. In retrospect, if you wrote that book now, knowing the public's, the public sphere as it is, would it be a much different book? Do you think? Would it be?
Yeah, I think, yes, I think, and it's one of the reasons that this process is sort of dragged is not really the right word, but why it's taking so long to progress, because the conversation is constantly changing. And as I say, the process of producing the books is so slow, takes so long.
Right.
And even then when it's finished, it then sits at the publisher for whatever, 6 months or something. And the way things have been in the last few years, things that you think you're presenting as radical new information is yesterday's news by the time the book comes out, right?
Right. Yeah.
So, so it's tricky, and you know, I said to you before we did this interview that I specifically don't talk about the phenomenon in terms of here's what's real, here's the real stuff that we put in the book,
Right.
and
Right.
because it's not my area of expertise, and that's Tom's domain, but
Course.
also because one of the reasons we were able to write these books and get people to tell us things was because they were works of fiction.
Yeah.
And we were able to say, no, we will not say this is exactly true. This is a story.
Yeah.
It's a story that's grounded in a lot of things that a lot of people are talking about now.
Right.
But, you know, yeah, part of my position of sort of saying, not underlining, oh, here's the key thing that you should be paying attention to, you know,
Of course.
is because the moment we start doing that, the more they become something different, and the more I think we would find it a lot harder to write them.
Oh, of course. Of course. Yeah. I mean, it's interesting to see. And I think, I mean, what do you think? Do you think, I personally think that those books moved the paradigm of where we're at right now. Honestly, I do. I think those books help move the paradigm to where we're currently talking about when the Congress is having open and closed meetings, and, you know, there's language written into law, and there's all these things happening. I honestly believe that those books pushed that envelope down the road. Have you ever thought about that is part of the reason why?
Well, I mean, as you said, part, right? I mean,
yeah.
This is a sort of a big, complicated machine, and I think the books may have been one of the sort of wheels or cogs within that machine. So, you know,
I mean, it directly influences people's perceptions. I promise it has. I mean, I've had multiple kinds of conversations with people that I've met that said, yeah, I read that book and it changed my perception on this whole thing. Right. I looked at it from a different way. I didn't, you know, think about it. And I think it was the human element, the way that you wrote it, into a relatable manner. Like you said, it wasn't just here's a fact. This is, you know, a boring documentary. This is somebody's a character arc, and you care about these characters, and you want to see how they progress. I mean, I don't know, a day doesn't go by that you probably don't get hounded like, where's book three? You know, like everybody wants the finale, you know, the ending of it. I mean, because they fall in love with the story and the characters, and like you said, it's an ever evolving thing.
Yeah, and the only thing I can say about that is that there will be a book 3, but I don't know when.
Yeah.
You know, I mean, it's going to come out, but
6 years, 6 months, who knows?
Well, right. I mean, and the other thing is, I've seen a number of people say, you know, the 3rd book is done and they're just waiting. It's like, that's not true. Right. Apart from anything else, it would be crazy, given what we've just been saying about how quickly the conversation moves, to have written the book and then sit on it, because by the time it comes out, it's not going to feel like it has anything like the same edge to it. So no, but it's tied up in all kinds of things, including TV development and various other things. So I just, you know, I don't know.
Yeah, well, that's an interesting question then as well, because I think that, you know, I've seen this in other adaptations, you know, to television, was when you say they pick it up and it's a series. How does that influence book 3? Does that, you know, because eventually you're going to run out. I think what was it? George Martin.
Yeah,
I think that Game of Thrones, where they ran out of content and then they just kept going. And I don't know if that was him or not, or if it was partially him, or, I mean, that's got to be kind of a kick in the nuts as an author, right? To be like, okay, well, you bought all my stuff.
It's the same company.
Oh yeah, right.
Legendary. So, it's the same company. The people who currently have Sekret Machines in development are the same people who did Game of Thrones. So yeah, and I'm not involved in that at all. Right.
So
you know,
it'd be interesting to see. I mean, at that point, if that happens, I mean, can the book stand alone then, as like, if that series didn't occur? I mean, can you as an author write the 3rd book or another or 4th or 5th book aside as a separate universe from the?
I mean, To the Stars owns the copyright, so, you know, it's up to that company, and therefore up to Tom as to, you know, what we do in terms of navigating those kind of things, but I'm not really, connected as far as, I mean, the TV people, some of the TV people have asked, I've had conversations with them, fielding questions about plot issues and points,
Yeah.
but, it was an option rather than a sale.
Okay. Yeah.
And so, and I know that they've spent fairly serious money on developing a pilot script and
Gotcha.
this sort of, but so far as I know, nothing has been filmed.
Mhm.
And I think that probably the whole thing has to be greenlit before anything gets shot. And I don't know when that will happen. I know that they're close to making a decision. Maybe a decision has already been made. Last I heard, within the last few weeks / a month or two, there were revisions going on of the pilot, and it was still moving forward, but I don't know.
Yeah. Well, that's cool. That'd be pretty rad to see. I mean, as an author, that'd be kind of cool to see that happen. And,
Yeah,
it'd be interesting to see, like, when you write for characters and you kind of have this, and you describe them in the book, how they look, how they act, how they feel, and to find an actor to play that character has got to be interesting to see that come to life on the screen and say, yeah,
yeah,
I came up with that. I created that. That's got to be like, like giving birth almost. Like, this is my baby and I'm giving it to the world, right?
yeah, yeah. I remember thinking that when, I don't know if you remember, when the first book came out, Angels and Airwaves did an EP.
Oh, I loved it because it was so tied to the album. I thought it was rad.
And I was like, and I remember the first time I heard the title track, I was in Tom's car we were in California, and he's like, "Hey, check this out." And he played me some of it. And then I was with them in the studio when they were sort of, and I was like, "That's my title. I came up with that."
That is so awesome. And when you listen to Overload, and like the Manus is, I mean, like the lyrics he wrote for it, and it's awesome. And that's kind of how, like, I think for me too, because when you do read it, and then you had that whole mixed media part of it. I mean, the soundtrack to the novel, right? I mean, it was kind of rad. I mean, when you go back and forth, you can kind of feel that whole movie-esque kind of vibe to the characters and to the especially the way the EP came out. It was pretty cool. You can kind of feel the progression. I mean, I think it would be a rad show. Honestly, I think it'd be really cool.
I think Tom has a very cinematic sensibility, and I think you hear that particularly with Angels and Airwaves, in terms of the way that he sort of sees that musical landscape. I think, but again, I don't even know if he would be involved in the development as far as the Sekret Machines TV show is concerned.
Right at that point, it just becomes like its own beast, right? You just kind of give it up and let it go.
I mean, I think, To the Stars are approaching a number of these projects in different ways. Some of them, they're looking to hand off to other production companies and letting them just run with them. And some of them developing themselves, like Monsters of California and things like that, which have more direct involvement.
Right. So, yeah, it's kind of like it's a big conglomerate, a bunch of stuff going on. I mean, that had to be interesting to see, like you said, when you first came in the beginning, like 10 years ago, like you're just going, what is going on? Like, what? Trying to wrap your mind around this entire thing, going, I don't know if this is going to work. Like, I mean,
I mean, it was a sort of a facing. I remember having conversations with him early on when he said, "I want this to be a trilogy, and I want them to be like 600-700 pages." And I was like, "Oh my God, what am I getting involved in?" But I think, but as I say, working with him was really great, and finding ways into the stories that I found compelling for myself, I think was sort of crucial. Yeah.
Well, yeah, definitely. I mean, I've heard you say at least other reviews that you put one of the interludes is an actual direct story from you.
That's right. Yeah, it was. Yeah, from when I was in Japan. Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, and I think that kind of, I mean, from everybody I've met and talked to throughout the years, I mean, everybody has a story, but like some people will share it, and some people have amazing stories, and other people will never tell you even if they had one. But I really think that unless you do have your own story or your story with the experience, that you don't really have a good grounding or grasp in any of it really. And unless you could be truthful with yourself and say, hey, yeah, this happened, right? I don't know what it is, but it happened. And
Right, which was and that was my position. I mean, that little anecdote in the first Secret Machines book is, a complete open-ended, non-event kind of thing. It's not spectacular. It doesn't have plot consequences. It doesn't have like some smoking gun pointing to exactly what I was seeing.
mm-hmm.
But it was an important thing for me to include something like that as a way of putting a character into the story who is a skeptic, is a realist, and doesn't, automatically think, oh my God, I'm looking at a UFO and therefore all the stuff that I've heard must be true.
Right.
Because I think that, most people who read, okay. I was going to say most people who read these kind of books are going to be coming from that kind of perspective. But I don't know that that's actually true now, because these books have become books that get read by UFO folks,
Right.
And I sometimes want To the Stars and Simon and Schuster to sort of present the books not simply targeting that kind of readership. I wish
mm-hmm.
they would position them simply as thrillers or
right.
I understand why Tom is wary of sci-fi for this kind of context, but I think in some way, one of the issues sometimes is that you feel like you're preaching to the choir.
Right. Oh, yeah.
The only people who are reading them are people who are already invested.
Exactly. Exactly.
And I would like a wider audience.
Well, yeah, I think you kind of did. I mean, what were the categories that were the two books listed in? If you would go to Barnes and Noble, I mean, would they be sitting under sci-fi, or are they under thriller, or are they? I mean, like, I don't
think they were under. I think Barnes and Noble probably put them under sci-fi.
Sci-fi, right? Yeah. So it's kind of that gray area. But yeah, but how do you? I mean, it'd be interesting to see. I mean, you change the cover, you change the marketing a little bit, and I mean, that's got to be interesting to see that effect. You change the cover here, and what does it do, right? I think you experimented with that a little bit in a couple of your novels, haven't you? Changing the covers and for different.
Oh yeah, I mean, I have with other publishers. Yeah,
right. Yeah,
I have some books that have had radically different covers, especially if you include foreign presses.
Right. How does that change the overall book? Like,
I mean, it can change it quite drastically. That I've seen. I've seen books that look like they're in totally different genres.
Yeah.
Especially in certain, other countries where it's like, here's what's selling right now, so we're going to use that. And I'm like, yeah, but this is a romance, and this book is not remotely a romance. I'm like, well, this is what we're going with. And I'm like, okay. But it would be, I mean, one of the interesting things I think would be, if the Secret Machines TV show actually happens, how that would change the readership of the books.
Right. Because it's a different audience. It'd be a wider audience. It would have to be, you
would think, right? Because people will dip into a TV show in ways that they wouldn't go to a bookstore and buy a 600, 700 page novel,
Exactly.
So, I mean, I'm sure a lot of people who watched the X-Files and those kind of shows were not people who were, hardcore ufologists, right?
Right, but they have that base knowledge behind it to go, okay, well, maybe this is there's something to this, but the whole marketing behind it has to be an interesting play. I mean, how do you do that? And I think, honestly, I think it does work. Like I said, my mom, she's 70. I gave her the book. She read it. She loved it, So, I mean, it spans, ages and genres, I think, because of the way you wrote it. I don't think it's a narrowed in. It's not sci-fi. It's not a thriller. It's everything. It's all of it, and that had to be the hardest. I mean, I keep a couple of my notes. I keep looking at them like, how the hell did you do that? Like, how did you just, encapsulate all of those things? And then plus, the other elements that are, um, kind of mundane. I mean, you building the thriller aspects to some of the things the characters are getting into, but you made it believable because, like you said, you're selling a reality up front that you're based in some data reality, and then okay, well,
Mm.
even this is really crazy. It's kind of far fetched, but you can see it as it goes, and then. And I don't think you escalated that to a point where it got to be ridiculous throughout the series. And I don't think you hit a plateau. I think it was a good cadence throughout the whole thing. And, I think it's a great read. It's one of those ones, honestly, I'm just sitting there going, and when I first got it, I got the preprint and I'm just for like 2 days or something, and I'm just like, yep, I'm not talking to anybody. I'm hanging out right here, and just finding little things. And it was great. And then Cathedrals of Glass, that whole series too. I mean, like, where did that come from? How did that whole project happen? Like, what was that?
Well, it's a weird thing actually, because the first of the Cathedrals of Glass books was written before I ever talked to Tom.
Really?
Mm.
Oh, no way.
Yeah. I'd written it, and my agent took it out, and we didn't get it was a weird time, it was a strange market at the time, and I had just written both the first Cathedrals of Glass book and the first Steeplejack book.
Oh, okay. At the same time, all right.
Pretty much around the same time.
Yeah.
The Cathedrals of Glass book had already sort of gone around, and nobody was sort of biting my hand off to take it.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
And the Steeplejack book had been on submission for months, and we weren't getting anything. And it was around that time that my agent contacted me and said, so this guy, Tom DeLonge, has just reached out to us and is interested in talking to you about this project. And I was like, and I literally remember thinking, well, what else have I got going on? I may as well talk to this guy, right? She's like, have you ever heard of 182? And I'm like, yeah. So Tom and I started talking, and my agent was involved in those conversations, and I was still a little leery.
Oh yeah.
I didn't know what it. I mean, he had no track record as a writing person or as a publishing person, so I was like, the one thing I don't want to do is spend another year or two of my life working on a project that never happens, or it falls apart, or that doesn't go anywhere. And one of the things about Tom, when you talk to him, is that he's so charismatic and so excited that when you come off the phone, you're like, oh my God, this is the greatest thing ever, and it's going to be massive, and everything he's saying. And I had conversations with my agent where she was like, this guy should be running for president, because every time you talk to him, and then a week goes by and you're like, wait a minute, what? And at one point I remember saying, he's like, yeah, I want you to do 3 of these, three Sekret Machines books.
Yeah.
And I was like, I don't know, man. I don't know that I can commit to this. And he said, what else have you been working on recently? And I mentioned the Cathedrals of Glass book. It wasn't called that at the time.
Yeah.
I mentioned that. And he's like, oh, send me that. So I sent it to him, and I don't know, if like a few days later, he's like, yeah, I love this. I want 3 of those as well.
You're like, shit.
And I was like, well, at least that one's written.
Yeah, right. Yeah.
And so, we talked to my agent, and eventually I was like, okay, I literally have nothing else going on, so I'm going to do this, and let's see how it goes.
Right.
And within a week of agreeing to do the contract, the tour got back to me through the agent on the Steeplejack books, and they said, we want 3 of those as well. So I went from having nothing under contract to having 9 books under contract within the space of about, I don't know, 3 or 4 weeks. And it was terrifying, absolutely terrifying.
Oh my God. Did you just lose your mind at that point? You're just like, how am I going to do that?
I was like, I don't know that I can do it. I don't know how I'm going to do this. You know,
Wow.
yeah.
That's
So in that
amazing.
situation, it actually helped that it took Tor so long to get that first book out,
Right.
because it meant that I wasn't being pushed for book two of the Steeplejack series, and I could focus on whatever the hell this Sekret Machines thing was going to be.
Right. Did you like simultaneously work on the second book for Cathedrals of Glass? Like was that like an after that you got done with the Secret Machines and then you're like, okay, I'll go.
I'm not good at working on multiple projects simultaneously unless they are at radically different stages. I can do
Uh,
first draft on one thing and do some sort of, copy edits and things like that on something that's basically done. But
right.
I can't develop two new projects at the same time. So I tend to be quite single-minded
Just
and stick to one thing as we go. So I can't remember what the sequencing of the publication. I don't have them in front of me in terms of when they all came out. I
right. It was real
guessing
close.
Machines came first, right?
Yeah, I think it was. I
And
think it was in
then
between the two, if I remember
yeah,
right. Yeah.
and then the first Cathedrals of Glass book, and
Hmm.
then the second Sekret Machines book, and then the second Cathedrals of Glass book, which, initially when I first wrote Cathedrals of Glass, it was intended to be a standalone.
Right.
It was a one and done kind of thing. And it was only when Tom said, I think this has legs as a series. So now we have to start thinking about where the story goes after the end of book one. So,
Well, that's
and
interesting.
again, that's also, as I say, there's some conversations about some sort of development with that as well. So we'll see. I don't know. It's very early days.
Well, I mean, I love the story. It's wild. And some of the themes, I mean, are of course it's kind of hitting right at home with this AI boom and everything that's going on, and you look at it that way.
Mhm.
What, some of it's some of the most amazing part. I mean, the questions I have on it are kind of wild, but like to me, it sounds like there's some kind of, it's more of a mind virus in my mind. That's what I keep going back to. It's some kind of mind virus that's trying to inject itself or bring itself back to reality and use humans to do that. And people are saying that about AI all over the place right
Mhm.
now. They're like, how is this happening? How is this, is this something where we're trying to build a technology to bring about this non-human intelligence to
Right.
do whatever? I mean, how the hell did you? I mean, you, this was pre Secret Machines where you came up with that. How did like what inspired you to go down this road as far as the themes, the
Um,
consciousness and the
yeah,
telepathy and all that? Like, how did you come up with that?
I have no idea. I genuinely don't really remember. It was, what was this? I think it was in part, thinking about even then, the extent to which our humanity is now technologically mediated.
Right.
We sort of live through things like this, right?
Yeah.
And through various forms of cyber communication, digital communication, and trying to sort of imagine an end point of a society which
Mm,
has become so completely invested in that a kind of morality system has developed around being deeply suspicious of the sort of flesh and blood element of humanity, a sort of puritanical,
right.
technological puritanism.
Yeah. Which is the
And
opposite.
then imagining what would happen if you pulled the plug on that. Actually, I do know there is an E.M. Forster story.
Oh.
The guy who wrote um, Forster, Howard's End and
Oh, okay.
right, this sort of end of epoch Victorian. Oh man, why I'm blanking now on titles. E.M. Forster. He's mostly, he wrote a lot about sort of empire and stuff like that. But he wrote this extraordinary short story
Hmm.
in I want to say in the 1920s
Oh, wow.
called The Machine Stops.
Huh. Okay.
And it was about a human society living in this entirely machine assisted um, uh, environment, social structures where there was no kind of human interaction anymore. Everything was mediated by some form of computer. I have no idea how he wrote this in the 1920s.
Right, right,
And as the title suggests, one day it breaks
right.
and the society completely collapses. And but it's about what these individuals are going through, and I think a version. I remember reading that as a maybe 15-year-old,
Right,
and,
right.
and it stayed with me. And so this was a kind of Cathedrals of Glass was a kind of rethinking of that story within a kind of technology that was even closer to where we are.
Yeah.
Um, and in some ways, it was the first real sci-fi I'd written. Is that true?
Hmm.
Yeah, I think it is.
Wow. That's
Yeah.
cool.
So,
Yeah, well,
yeah.
I mean, but like, I don't think I mean, reading it, I wouldn't label it as a sci-fi, but of course, maybe I'm coming from the lens of, I'm more interested
It's
in,
not. It's not hard sci-fi.
right,
I mean, it's somewhere in between hard sci-fi and space opera, I suppose, because it doesn't spend a lot of time worrying about the science of how things function, and
right.
there's gravity on the ship because I say there is. I
Yeah,
mean,
yeah, yeah, and that's the way it works, right?
yeah, yeah.
Yeah, but I mean, obviously Tom liked it. Did he influence any of the second book? Did he twist
Yes.
it? He did. Oh,
Yeah,
okay. I
yeah.
was
We
wondering
talked
about
quite
that.
a lot about the second book. I remember he had some particular ideas about the sort of mind games that you were talking about before, which become central to the second book in particular.
Hmm.
Um, and a lot of that emerged from conversations that I had with him because, as I say, initially there wasn't intended to be a second book.
Right, right.
Um,
So how do you extend
so
this and keep it
yeah,
going? And right.
yeah, yeah. And we've talked a lot about, again, that the third book has not been done.
Mhm.
Uh, and we'll see. But again, since there is now some conversation about some sort of screen adaptation, we may wait to see if that happens, what direction it kind of goes, and things before committing to the third book.
Right, right. The second book reminded me. I know Tom talks a lot, and it's pretty interesting hearing some of the things he goes on about. But I know he spoke about there's a pyramid underground in Alaska that's suppressing consciousness, worldwide, and it's like, holy shit, where did I hear something like this before? Did I read something about this at some
Mm.
point? Does that have something to do? It seems like a book that I read at some point. I mean, it
Mm.
seems like there's some kind of, bleed through there. I was like, wow, that's cool. So, it's interesting to see the parallels of some of the characters and some of the stuff
Mm.
that Tom says. But I thought that was interesting. It, it, it's a great novel. I think, and I highly suggest anybody watching this or listening to this go pick those up as well. I mean, they're amazing, great
Thanks.
books. Yeah, I think that's cool. I mean, that would be rad to see as a series as well. I mean, I think, yeah, graphic novel, easy, right?
Yeah.
Like you said, that's just the world descriptions alone would be amazing to see that whole
Yeah.
end of future kind of
Yeah.
monstrosity.
There was some talk early on about some sort of more, because I remember he commissioned some art to go with the series, and there was at least some talk at one point of including a lot of pictures in the novel, but that, for whatever reason, didn't happen, probably for cost issues.
Yeah.
But I think he still has some of that art sitting around, so I don't know if maybe there'll be some other edition someday.
Well, that's cool. That'd be cool.
Mm.
Uh, what do you think about ever when when you get to the end of the three series, repackaging is a set? And I mean, is that something you've ever thought about? Is like putting it all together into one big series and then maybe, I don't know, adding or something to that? Is that something that you've ever thought about? Like,
I mean, I haven't really, because I tend to leave the sort of packaging issues and things like that to the
Mhm.
publisher.
Mhm.
But I'm sure that given the way that To the Stars works, something like that would happen at some point. Yeah.
Right, right, right. It'd be cool to kind of see, just all of it together and here's the conclusion and, here's, I mean, you don't want it to end, but there's so many people looking for closure,
Oh,
at
yeah.
some of these things.
Yeah. Yeah.
And interesting to see how that whole plays out. But
Mm.
man, so what have you been working on lately? What's going on now? What do you, I mean, You can't talk about it. I mean, we can't talk about Trinity, kind of. We're not really. We're not supposed to. But
yeah, we can't really talk about Trinity, and there's something else that I can't talk about, and that's yeah. So sorry about that.
No, that's okay. So there's a couple things you can't talk about that you're working on, though. That's
yeah. The next thing is, I don't know if you probably the second in this series, the Hideki Smith.
Yeah, it just came out. It just came out, right? That's really
came out
December.
Yeah, tail end of last year. And so yeah, that'll be the next thing after I'm done with the stuff that I'm currently working on that I can't talk about. So yeah.
Okay,
sorry.
so no, it's okay. No worries. I completely understand how that all works. One question I jumped on your website and I saw your writing station. Are you still using plywood and 2x4s nailed to the wall with your laptop stuck to it?
It's intermittent. Yeah, I mean, yes.
I mean, it seems like if that's your space, that's your space, right? I mean,
it's funny. My relationship with the house has changed since I'm now officially retired as an academic, which means I'm at home a lot more. But my wife is also retired, so we're now sort of divvying up the house in different kinds of ways. So yeah.
This is my room. I'm taking this, and you're kind of this is where you write. So do you have to when you get up? You treat it like a job, right? You get up, you do your morning thing, breakfast, whatever, and then you just boom, you sit down and you just start writing. Is that how
pretty much? Yeah. Yes, which is why I usually, plan things out. I don't always, the thing that I'm working on right now, I only have a kind of sketch of the shape of the whole thing, but I have to plan out the next few chapters in my head at least, and make some notes in advance so that I don't waste time. It is a job. And I think people sometimes who are not writers mystify the process a little bit.
Yeah.
And think it's all about sort of inspiration and what have you. And hopefully there's some of that as well, but there's a lot of work, a lot of craft,
Right.
You would never, a cabinet maker would never say, well, I don't feel inspired to build this cabinet today. So I'm not
going to do it. Yeah.
Yeah. No, you get your tools out and you build it. Right.
Right.
The same is true with writing. I think that I come from a very working class background. And so I have a fairly utilitarian attitude to constructing these things. And, what you're producing is first draft. So it's not going to be great, and it's going to require various kinds of editorial polish and rethinking, but sometimes you just have to pound out the words. And I think this is part of the lure of the AI, which I find quite scary, because people are clearly looking at this as just the I want to be a novelist, so I'm going to use some AI tool to basically produce a book for me, and I'll stick it up on Amazon. And I worry that the reading public will not care, or will not be able to distinguish that between that and stuff that people have spent a lot of time working on. And of course, most of it will be crap.
Well, and I think going back to what we talked about, I think that your passion and the soul is the only word that comes to mind, comes through when you are creating art and writing is an art, music is an art, painting is an art, all of these things are art, sports to some extent are an art, when you put your heart and mind and your soul into something that really shines through. And I haven't gotten any of that experience looking at any type of AI generated text or images. So,
or music. Now I'm seeing ads for people like, you want to produce your own single? Here, just type in a few. What the hell is that?
Yeah. Here's some drums. Make the drums sound like Blink.
I genuinely don't get it. What is the point of producing a song where all you did was put in a few prompts? In what sense is that your song? It's nothing. It's merely a conglomeration of borrowed, stolen stuff from other people. I don't get it.
It almost feels like you should be walking up to it and sticking quarters into it.
Right. Yeah.
And
Yeah.
having it spit something out, right? So it feels
Right.
like it should be that kind of machine where it's,
Yeah.
you're losing that difference. But I mean, for all of that part of it, I completely understand some of the innovations and some of the medical discoveries and all those things. I think that's
Oh, of
awesome.
course. Of
Love
course. Yeah.
love that part of the whole thing. But yeah, definitely. I mean,
Yeah.
there's definitely it has to be something done, and
Mm.
I don't know. I mean, it's interesting. I mean, at some point, AJ, you might be able to just stick all of your books in there and just say, "Hey, write me this next novel in my voice and in my tone," right?
Yeah.
And then
That's
pop out.
worrying, though, isn't it? Yeah. Yeah.
Mhm. Yeah, I mean, so
Yeah.
like I was doing, I use it for a couple things, research, getting ready for just to speak with you. And one of the funny things is like, all right, tell me, okay, Secret Machines, when's the dates when it came out and was published, and all those things. And it said, okay, yeah, Secret Machines Book 3 came out in 2022, and yeah, it said some pretty funny stuff. It said that what's the name of it? It even gave it a name, and it had like this whole synopsis of it.
It's
And
amazing.
yeah, and I'm like, I gotta put my glasses on because I wanted to share it with you. It's like, yeah, Secret Machines Book 3, Black Matter, 2022. The latest installment focuses on the nature of time travel, dimensional realities, and the possibility of alternate versions of history. Yeah, and it said, yeah, that was the book. That was book 3 that came out in 2022. AJ, is called Black Matter, and those
I mean,
things.
it's not a bad title, but
It's like, where did it come up with that? I was
it's
like, what does that
so
even mean?
bizarre. But I've done that. I've occasionally sort of, I asked some AI program to produce a biography of me,
Right?
and it was amazing the extent to which it got stuff wrong.
Really?
Yes, it
Yeah.
invented things. It created a wife with who had a completely different biography and name. I'm just like, just not. It's not even that hard to find this stuff out,
Must have just
right?
scraped the internet. It's right. It's on your website, probably.
But yeah, exactly. It's like, well, it's not that difficult. How can you get this so badly wrong?
Yeah.
And worries me, of course, is that these things then become self-replicating. The more bad information they spit out, the more that gets fed into other searches, and at some point we lose the capacity to distinguish real stuff from fake.
Yeah. And
Yeah.
yeah, we're getting close to it. That's
Yeah.
that's it. But I don't know. Black Matter. There you go. I'll time
Yes.
time travel and alternate realities of historical realities. There you go. Yeah.
And on that note, I'm probably going to have to take off.
No, I appreciate all of the time. Thank you so much.
Sure.
I appreciate the time and everything. And obviously excited about all the new stuff. I'm going to be probably first in line to get the preprint copy of Trinity, if that happens, if it goes through that whole thing again. Hopefully Tom keeps that whole thing going where you get to autograph a whole bunch and
Yeah, I don't know what their plans are, but I mean, we have a publication date. I'm sure there's going to be stuff coming out hopefully soon, which, details more about when it'll be available and all the rest of it. But yeah, it should
yeah,
happen.
it's already available for pre-order on Amazon and all the other
Okay.
places. Yeah, so it's already out there. I mean, you can go grab it. It's just interesting to see how that the publishers just do that and everybody else is like, but like you said, it's interesting to also see the other side where a book sits for 6 months or longer when the slow wheels of publishing.
Yeah. Yeah.
What? So just as maybe for my own edifice, like a budding writer, what's the best advice? Publish it yourself, do your own thing. What do you say as after all the years and your experience of doing it all?
I think the most successful writers that I know, unless they are household names,
Mhm.
are doing some sort of hybrid between traditional publishing and either self-publishing or small press. With self-publishing, obviously you have total freedom to produce whatever you want to produce,
Right.
but you're also entirely responsible for marketing and all the rest of it. And there's so much stuff. And again, the AI issue is going to make it even harder.
Right.
That there
Right.
are, I don't know how many millions of books come out each year, but it's a massive number.
Right.
And so, it's easy to produce a book. The hard thing is discoverability, making it visible.
Right. Right.
And at least with traditional presses, though they don't always do a great job, there is some sense of of some visibility. Practically
Gotcha.
everybody I know who has a traditional publishing contract is, I don't want to oversimplify it.
Mhm.
Most of the writers I know who have traditional publishing contracts with particularly big New York houses sell more books
Gotcha. Okay.
than people who are self-publishing, unless you're one of those self-publishing people who's producing like a book a month, or
Okay.
a dedicated readership who are passionate, and particularly in certain kinds of genre like romance, where
Right.
people are cranking out these things. That's not something I would ever want to do personally.
Yeah. Right. Right.
But some people have real dedicated fan bases and make a decent living that way. Um, but I think for most self-published authors, usually the numbers are lower.
Right. Gotcha. So is the hybrid, the small press, the something in
The
between?
hybrid, I think, I don't really self-publish, but I
Right.
do, some stuff with big presses and some stuff with small presses, basically depending on who wants what, because I'm not writing to the market. I'm writing, as we said,
Yeah.
kind of what I feel like writing.
Right.
Sometimes big publishers don't want what I'm producing. I mean, with Hideki, people just didn't really know what to do with it. And at the time when I first submitted that novel, they were not certain how to handle, or not really interested in, representation of mixed race characters.
Really?
Yeah, not really, no,
Huh.
no. They had very specific ideas for the kinds of story that they wanted. Part of the myth is that, people think, oh, well, suddenly publishing is really interested in writers of color and things like that.
Right.
It's not really true,
Hmm.
that they reserve certain slots
Wow.
for those kind of books, but they don't treat those books as appealing to whatever mainstream readers.
Wow. Interesting. And
So,
they've already created the slots for it. And if you're somewhere outside of that boundary,
right.
you just can't, there's no
So,
place for it. Right.
yeah. So a lot of writers of color find themselves fighting for a very limited number of slots on a publisher's list.
Wow.
And,
That's a damn
you know,
shame,
yeah, yeah. So,
honestly.
yeah. So at the moment, I use both. If I sell a book to a big house like Tor or Penguin or whatever, fine.
Right.
And if I don't, then I'll go with a smaller house you know, if that fits it. So,
That's cool. Well, that's good. And I didn't know that about the publishers and how that fits. I mean,
mm,
that's kind of, I mean, that's probably explains a lot of the pseudonyms and some of the ghostwriting and some of the other things because of that reason right there, right? Because of the
right.
inherent genre pigeonholing that they put you in there.
Yeah,
And
yeah, yeah.
that's kind of a shitty thing. Hate to end on that note.
All part of reality.
It is. It is. Well, we got good things coming up though. We got Trinity, which we can't talk about. We got this other thing that you're doing. We can't talk about it all. And then another thing that you might be able to talk about at some point. And there's the TV series for both. I'm thinking ahead that you might have one of the best weeks ever. You might get the news that Cathedrals of Glass is picked up for the TV, that Sekret Machines, and then Steeplejack finally out the same time.
Well, that would be a big week, yeah.
Then you're going to be like right in the same boat. Shit, now what do I do?
Right, right. Except, of course, that I wouldn't actually have to do anything. I just sort of sit back and take the money.
Nothing wrong with that.
Right.
AJ, thank you so much, man. I really appreciate it, dude.
Appreciate it. Thanks, man.